All right, great. Welcome everyone. My name's Akash. I head strategy and partnerships at Katalyst Labs. We have a really exciting session today for founders with Mubariz Siddiqui. I'll just quickly introduce Mubariz. Mubariz is a legal practitioner with extensive experience working with startups, venture capital funds, and angel investors in Pakistan. He frequently works with regulators on policy initiatives to facilitate foreign investment and innovative early stage businesses in Pakistan. Recently, he was the general counsel at Sarmayakar, a Pakistan focused venture capital fund. He has been practicing law since 2008 and has also been previously working at Hub Power Company as well, and Barker Gillette and Or Dignam and Company. So, Mubarak, thank you for joining us, and it's great to have you here today.
Thanks a lot for having me, Akash. Happy to come on board with Katalyst Labs again, and excited about what you guys have in store in the future.
Absolutely perfect. So Mubarak, as you may know, and a lot of people watching us today might know, Katalyst Labs is an accelerator and innovation hub, and we have two key programs. One is an acceleration program for startups, and another one is a fellowship program for women leaders as well. So for the accelerator, we especially are really excited to sort of like welcome applications in several verticals, but what we're particularly also really interested in is fintech. And we have recently seen this huge boom in startups, fintech startups that have also raised a lot of funding. So there's obviously a lot of really great interest in the sector. But often, and we have seen this, during our experiences over the past few years working with startups, fintech startups can be slightly different. They can be slightly more challenging for founders to think about, and they have their own host of requirements. We thought we could sort of sit down with you today and discuss what some of those interesting elements might be that aspiring fintech founders or founders that are already working on their startups within fintech can sort of like start to think about. And obviously, we're also welcoming questions from the audience, so they can also be related to startups of any other vertical. So guys, please feel free to drop your questions on Facebook. So Mubarak, first of all, we'll start off with this question that you mentioned how you've also recently worked a lot with regulators. And then, we have been excited about fintech. The ecosystem has been excited since the past several years, but we have sort of seen a rush in startup funding in that space right now. So is that because, are there some key changes and initiatives that have been taken by regulators that make it easier for fintech founders to start their companies?
Thanks a lot, Akash, for that question. And yeah, there was this. I remember reading this blog by someone at A16Z. I forget the name of the partner, which said that every company will be a fintech, right? Because there's an opportunity to embed financial services in a lot of things that you do. So if you're in e-commerce, there's always an opportunity to have a BNPL, buy now, pay later, embedded in it. If you are doing a supply chain, like you have your Jugnu, Retailo, Bazaar, Tajir, these companies, their comparables abroad do involve a big fintech element as well. So absolutely, there's financial services are probably, and fintech is a good delivery mechanism for a new and innovative financial services. So obviously, this is an opportunity that is very relevant for Pakistan. Now, in terms of what the regulators have done, which has facilitated the change, so when we think about fintech, we have to divide fintech between the two regulators, right? So the two regulators that regulate fintech in Pakistan are State Bank of Pakistan and the SECP, Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan. State Bank of Pakistan regulates all aspects of payments. So if you want to be a wallet, if you want to do what PayPal or Venmo do in the world, that's a state bank type of product. SECP regulates financial services. Financial services are leasing, invoice discounting, giving short-term loans, buy now, pay later, etc. They all fall within the SECP domain. State Bank, what they've recently done is they've launched the EMI license, which is Electronic Money Institute. license, which makes it easier. They've made the requirements a bit better than before to become or launch a wallet more easily. More recently, what they have done actually is share a draft of what the digital banking regulation would look like. And EMI invariably is your way, your path towards getting that digital bank license, which is again, it's finally someone is State Bank is allowing entrepreneurs to open a new bank in Pakistan. So that's a big change from State Bank's front. SECP, the big change that they've made is by allowing or introducing this thing called the SECP sandbox, regulatory sandbox. What SECP said was, if what you want to do does not fall within the framework or one of our existing regulatory frameworks, you can apply to the sandbox, and then we will facilitate whatever you're doing if it makes sense, if it overall gets into what SECP wants to do, or would be happy allowing. So yeah, these are the two big regulatory changes that have come about, which have led to some of this increased activity in the sector.
Fantastic. I think that's a really good summary of the sort of like key aspects that founders can start thinking about. So, given that there have been some positive changes in the regulation, how early do you think startup, how early do you think founders that are looking to set up businesses within the space should start thinking about regulation? Is it sort of like step number one in the startup journey? Is it something that they would do after creating the product itself? What would your advice and sort of like your experience be in this?
Okay, so it really depends, right? It really depends what the founders wants to do. One thing that's very important for founders to also understand is that where the regulator is coming from when it comes to fintech or generally financial services. When you are lending people money, number one, or when you're taking deposits from people, where you are, say, processing payments for people and their money will be held by you at some point. There is an expectation by the general public that someone is watching you, so that you cannot run away with people's money, right? Yeah. And that's particularly true for deposits. So if you're doing any activity where it involves you holding on to other people's money, it is and it should be regulated. So it really depends on what it is that you're trying to do. For example, if you want to do something around crypto assets, now cryptocurrency would fall within State Bank's domain, but say crypto assets, say NFTs or any other tokens would fall within SECP's domain. Now, SECP does not currently have any stated regulation for crypto related assets. So if that's the space that you want to get in, before you spend any resources or time on building a product around that, I would recommend getting clarity around whether this is permitted or not. But if you're getting into something which exists and is running in Pakistan and by multiple people, then yeah, at least you have a path towards a license. I would say try your product with a very limited audience, with a very small scale thing, and even the regulators are not very strict on those, right? But as long as you seek their guidance, as long as you reach out to them, as long as you express an interest or intention to get licensed at some point, I think in most of these things will be permitted.
Okay, great. So yeah, I think your point about the regulators becoming approachable now, so at least there's a certain pathway to sort of like getting things done is absolutely favorable. But then also, I guess there's a key point there that often in many different startup verticals, often the approach can be that just start growing and become big enough, and regulation is then something to take care of later. But I think within the fintech space, that's usually not the way, because you want to sort of have a path towards the regulators and sort of like have all of your registrations and stuff in process from as early as possible, right? Would you agree with that assessment?
Absolutely. See, it really depends. So if I'm in the logistics space and something today is not regulated, but tomorrow somehow the regulator decides to start regulating stuff, sure, then that's a risk you take whatever business you start. Because you know that uska to kuch bhi nahi kar sakte, right? Say for example, if tomorrow the government decides that every Kareem rider needs to be provided XYZ insurance, etc., etc.,
Yeah.
or such benefits. That's the regulation you did not account for because you did not know. So that's fine. That's the risk worth taking. But once you know that the space that I'm going to be working in is invariably going to be regulated. So say crypto assets, okay, or say if you want to do something along the lines of any deposit taking financial services, what the risk you run taking is, number one, the regulator could shut you down and shut you down forever as well, for not complying initially, knowing that there would be legal provisions around it. I would be a bit more cautious around such businesses, especially. So fintech is one of those spaces, and there could be times where you start off without regulation and you can just go on, and then they could just completely kill your momentum by asking you to go
Yeah.
apply for the license and so on. And so not having that clarity up front could be a big setback. Now, not saying that this would shut you down forever always. There could be situations where you would come out of it. It would be just be a minor inconvenience, etc. And that has happened with a few fintechs recently, even the high profile ones that
Yeah.
have been able to raise good rounds, etc. But the fact is that they got enough traction to prove enough to get those investors and backers on board, who can see them through this lull where they're still waiting for regulatory approval.
Yeah. Okay, so that makes sense. So I guess the point here is that for startups, for fintech founders, it's something that at least they should keep at the back of their mind and have a plan for. It's something that you can't just totally ignore. So that's great. Okay, so we also have a couple of questions. Ibrahim Afridi is asking if you have any suggestions for Sharia-based fintech idea stage startups and how the state bank sandbox will be helpful for such startups. So I think sandbox
If
is
you
with
have
SECP, right?
Yeah, Sandbox is with SECP. So if you're doing some Sharia-based financing or financial services, you should definitely apply to the SECP Sandbox. This year's Sandbox is closed, but next year's will, I think, start somewhere around March, is when it typically starts. That's what I would recommend. Otherwise, see if what you want to build is already in the law. That's the first step, right? You can't qualify for the sandbox if what you want to do is already permitted. Sandbox is only for those activities that for which there's no current regulation. So I think you can do Sharia-based financial services today, depending on what it is that you're looking to do.
All right. And Shaikh Mohammad's asking, what are your thoughts about BNPL? Of any upcoming entrants in Pakistan, and what would the top few challenges be in that space?
I mean, I think we're all reading the same news around credit fix, around one or two other BNPLs that have raised some capital. Uh, yeah, it's a super exciting space. I think the challenges for Pakistan would remain around around recovery and enforcement of those contracts, right? Where people say if you're doing financial service for like 5,000, 10,000 rupee tickets, the cost of enforcing and recovering that amount is going to be far more than the amount that you're trying to recover. So those are going to be challenges for me. That's not an easy space to tackle. Determining someone's credit worthiness would also be a challenge. It's whether the demand exists or not. For sure, it does. Typically, people are using credit cards, etc., to do it. But this is going to be an interesting opportunity. It's going to be an interesting space to see how people are resolving these challenges around recovery and default.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll just move on with the discussion now and just build upon something that we, started discussing earlier, which is, given that founders, especially in the fintech space, have a host of, aspects to keep in mind, including regulation, registration, initial sort of like setup costs, initial funding. So do you think that it's essential for any serious fintech founder to actually raise funding as soon as possible to actually validate their ideas? Or do you think it's possible for them to run pilot and test out their ideas without it? Because it's interesting because fintech, I think, is a sort of like a different sort of a beast in that sense that most startup founders that come to us, we would say, before you even think about investment, run with the idea, get some traction, get some users. Otherwise, investors won't come to you. But fintech might be slightly different, where because you might need some of those licenses, you might need some legal help upfront. So how would you approach that?
Okay, no, that's a very good question, and it's typically a chicken and the egg scenario, right? You want some sort of traction to be able to convince an investor that you can actually execute on what you're saying you can. And in order to get traction, you need licenses, and those licenses say that you need to have X amount of capital before you can start this activity. So most financial services SECP licenses will range anywhere from 50 million to 150 million rupees, or 200 million rupees is what you need to be able to capitalize your company with. Now, this is not a license fee that you're paying. This is just money that you need to have with you to be able to spend and build this product. The regulators are coming from a perspective that, listen, if you're going to go out in the market and tell people you're providing the service, we need to see that you have enough financial muscle to be able to compensate people if required, etc. So that's why they keep these regulatory requirements, and they're coming from a place where what they need to be doing is regulating such players so that people or ordinary citizens, people like you and me, don't get impacted adversely. Now, there are certain ways in which you can be a fintech player and you can still test your hypothesis or validate your hypothesis. Now, that involves you working with an existing license holder. Now, if you want to do something in payments, you can go to a bank and you can go and ask them about working as a branchless banking. Regulations are still there. So which basically mean that I could be a contractor of a bank and I could then build the service, and I would be riding on the bank's license, but providing that service. Similarly, you could go to an existing NBFI, which is in the SECP domain, or existing financial services provider, and utilize their license to be able to do things. Most of these people, now, it's a difficult relationship to navigate. It's not always easy. I know founders are scared that other people will run with their idea. We all know that it's not the idea that really matters, right? It's about your ability to execute. So if you go to a bank and you're doing, say, you have proprietary technology with respect to solving a problem or providing a product, the banks would work with you as long as you make sense, or whatever your value you're providing makes sense, right? If it can be done without you, by cutting you out, they could do it right after you launch anyway, right? So that might not be the biggest risk that most people think it is.
Great. I think that's a really insightful answer. Where sure, it can be expensive to sort of start up these companies, and one approach of sort of going about it is to lock in partnerships potentially with banks, or sort of like work with other people, so that can enable you to try out your product. So I think that's great. So Raza Fazal wants to know if you have any insight on the EMI regulations. I know that's very specific. Is that something that you'd be able to shed any light on?
Yeah, so EMI is now going to be a digital bank. All existing EMIs will need to convert into a digital bank as and when the framework comes out. So EMI right now is a path to a digital bank. So if that's the intention, then definitely go for it. And coming back to our earlier discussion around working with banks, and I think even Katalyst Labs could somehow enable, maybe utilize your relationships with a bank or two, and banks should be having those sandboxes that SECP does, right? Where banks should be offering their license to potential partners to come on board, try your hypothesis out. We will make you a little controlled environment in which you can try this thing out. And if it works out, then either you apply for your own license or you keep working with the bank, etc. It would give banks a good insight into what works, what does not work, and I think that should be the primary motivation. But it could also give them access to potential partners and deals. So that's I think the need of the hour for a lot of fintechs, because as you rightly said, it does not make sense to raise. It does not make sense to go out and make a product till the time you have some sort of validation for your hypothesis.
Yeah. Okay, that's perfect. And now we've covered sort of like the initial aspect of sort of like fundraising around your startups. within the fintech space. What about sort of like engaging legal help, like bringing on board someone like yourself, other startup lawyers? How early should that happen? And is that sort of something that just comes part and parcel with sort of fundraising? Is that is that sort of help sort of needed at even the partnership stage when you're talking to banks, for example? What would your sort of like advice and experience on this be?
Yeah, I would say that when you're doing the ideation phase, I mean, a lot of these resources are available online. You can just look up the EMI regulations online and see what it covers, what it does not cover. Same with SECPs, NBFIs are also available online. So you should not necessarily have to be paying for this. Even if the people reach out to SECP, they're forthcoming with their insights. I think you should engage a lawyer and pay for a lawyer only when you have now made that commercial decision, or at least have a broad understanding of which direction you want to be heading into. Once you have clarity around what your product is, then I would recommend getting legal advice, because you have to navigate through a regulated space. Whenever you're navigating through regulated space, it's always best to get clarity around a subject matter expert. Similarly, if you are entering into a deal with the bank, then definitely get a lawyer. Because the bank side would obviously have legal representation and someone protecting the bank's interest. It's very important for the founders to protect their own interests as well, and the business's interest as well.
Okay, fantastic. So I think this question is actually not just around fintech, but I think applies to startups from all backgrounds. And we have seen this a lot as well, is in terms of sort of like your initial team might not necessarily end up being the sort of team that eventually sticks around. So in that sense, what would your advice be to startups around sort of like founder agreements? How important is it to formalize them as early as possible? And what are some of the things that founders can keep in mind in case, for example, things don't work out? What are some of the provisions that they can have in, and how can they manage expectations with each other early on?
No, okay, yeah. I think it's absolutely essential for founders to record their basic understanding. Don't have to go for, if your business is still not making money, I would not spend money on these other things, right? I would spend money whatever is required on validating the basic hypothesis, which is whether this will work, whether someone is willing to pay me for whatever value or service a product or service I'm providing. Everything else is a distraction at the earliest stage, right? However, once you have that, or even when you're embarking upon that journey, just sending an email from one founder to the other, where you record uh, saying that we will be 50-50 or 40-60, whatever that is. I will be this CEO, you will be CTO, our scopes would involve this, etc. And this is what we've generally spoken about. The idea being, and then if anyone leaves in the first year, they will lose all their equity. If someone leaves in the second year, they will only get 25%, and third year, 50%, fourth year, 100%, etc., etc. You could have a vesting thing, and that's not something very complicated. That's something very simple. Um, the idea being that I think most people, when these co-founder disputes happen, and that's one of the biggest reasons why most early stage startups don't work out, is that when these co-founder disputes happen, a lot of times it's not because people are trying to cheat each other, people are being malicious. I think most of the times there's a genuine disconnect in what they actually agreed to do. So just having recorded something in writing would give the founders the clarity they need amongst themselves. Just the process of typing that email out would give you a lot of clarity. And then the second part is that it would also help people recollect what their original intention was. So without having to spend money on a lawyer or having to spend money on a document, my recommended course of action is to always just record the understanding, just make sure. And besides recording and besides things that are legally enforceable, what's really important to understand is that why your co-founder is doing it, and whether you will be backing their reason of why they want to do it. And if you both are philosophically aligned, that should not be an issue. That should be an easier part. So yeah, my recommendation is just see what motivates each one of them and why they're doing this, the co-founders, and then record whatever basic fundamental understanding around the roles and understanding around the finances and equity, etc. Are.
Yeah, I think that's great advice because first, how that helps you is that just sort of like managing your communication and just making sure you communicate with the rest of your founders, and also because it's quite interesting, but often people just forget down the road. You know, they feel like they've had these conversations or so on. And the other founder will not remember them, or you will not remember them. So I guess even something as simple as just recording these over email can be helpful, and from a personal perspective can be really useful for the founders while moving forward. So I think that's great advice. Coming back to regulation, do you think there are any other sort of like requirements that founders need that they're looking towards, the state bank or SECPs, other positive changes in regulation that could be made by the regulators?
Of course, I think the most important change that state bank could be making is, number one, start thinking about crypto and start thinking about how to regulate cryptocurrency. Secondly, state bank should have a sandbox, just like the SECP, to try out new products or new kind of licenses that could come up and that are currently falling within the domain that they are regulating. Um, from an SECP point of view, what's actually important is to make sure that they continue with this progress. They keep regulating on providing robust regulations on whatever it is that's coming into the sandbox. Just the applications alone should give them a quite clear indication around what it is that people are looking to do, and they as regulators they should be just enabling more activity, and they should be enabling more problem solvers to go ahead and build things that would make Pakistani's life much easier.
Really interesting question, which is around basically from asked by Saad Ali, NDAs in Pakistan. And I think Pakistani culture is totally different in that sense, with non-disclosure agreements as compared to maybe rest of the world. So your insight here would be, quite useful.
Well, more all agreements. I mean, if it's a legally binding document, it's enforceable. The point is not the enforceability. The point is the enforcement mechanics. You still have to go to court. You have to hire a lawyer, and then those proceedings would take substantial amount of time. The question is whether in that time the information in question, was that really worth suing someone for? Would you be able to actually get damages? Did you actually suffer meaningful damage because of that information being leaked? Not really. No. A lot of founders, in most cases, are worried about the idea, which is alone again a very fluid thing. And especially in startups, you start with one assumption, trying to solve one thing, but then it keeps evolving with time, and it keeps evolving with whatever the realities that you face, right? So you mold yourself. You try to by the end of it, by the time you start working on something, by the time something is delivered, it's very different than what you thought of with initially. So if you're trying to protect that through NDAs and all, then you're wasting your time as well. You're wasting a lot of energy. If you don't trust the other party, don't be doing business with them. Don't share information with them. And that's pretty much what it is. Your relationships will have to be based on trust. And there's not a whole lot of legal documentation that would give you meaningful protection in that sense.
Yeah, so I think would it be fair to say then that in most cases NDAs aren't really needed, for startups?
Yeah, in most cases, no, you don't really need NDA. Especially don't go to an investor with an NDA, because investors very famously don't sign NDAs because they. So if you talk about say BNPL, I'm sure any investor would go through 6 or 7 different people who want to do BNPL. Now they might reject, or they will invariably reject all of them bar one, even if they invest in that space at all. Then the question is, if you sign an NDA with 7 people and then you invest in one of those 7, the remaining 6 could always argue that no, you took my proprietary information, etc. And that's not the point. If anyone's particular information was extremely valuable, then that's the team that the investor would invest in, right? So investors are typically investing in those teams and not really your particular idea as such, because no one's really doing unless it's a patent, unless it's something that's capable of being protected. It's a source code. It's something that of that nature. It's very difficult to protect it through an NDA anyway. So it's most likely in most situations not worth it.
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you, Mubariz. I think we'll just take a few more questions if anyone has them. It's a really informal chat, so I think it's been really fun. But while we wait to see if there are any questions, one aspect that I'd sort of like want to pick your mind on is, in fact, I was having this conversation with a potential startup founder recently. There's been this huge rush around fintech funding already, right? Do you still think there's space? Do you still think founders should continue to aspire to potentially build out ideas in the space? Or do you think now it's saturated? The winners are going to come from, already the dozens of startups that have gotten money in this space anyway?
No, I don't think it's saturated at all. And I don't think anyone, I mean, people might have raised some money, but they haven't gone on and conquered the market, right? Or actually delivered that kind of value. We are still a cash-based society. We don't have BNPL. Still don't have proper salary advance, etc. available. So all of these, there might be players who have raised capital in that area, but these problems are still not solved. So if you feel like you can do a better job than all of these founders who are raising capital around this, by all means, go for it. And invariably, we've seen in other markets how people could acquire you, people could merge, something good could come out of it. So I would not say that just because few players have raised money means that the space is saturated. There's still a lot of work to be done.
Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. It's really exciting. And I think the next few years will only get even more interesting, because not only will we see more new players come in, but we'll see how some of the existing players that have raised money perform, and the expectations are pretty high. But yeah, thank you, Mubariz, for joining us today. It's been a really fun, informal chat talking about the fintech space in Pakistan. For all of those watching us, our applications are currently open for our acceleration cohort. Like I mentioned, we're looking to bring on startups within not just fintech, but also mobile commerce, quick commerce, data and analytics, agri-tech, food, and so on. There's several advantages to joining our accelerator program. For fintech in particular, not only do you get to work with an experienced team that has worked with dozens and hundreds of startups, but also our key supporter is HPL. So for fintech startups, what that means is we can sort of like give you a direct engagement with the HPL team as well. And like Mubariz mentioned, HPL in particular is a bank that's very interested in sort of collaborating with upcoming fintech and startups. And then, of course, we're also partnered with the global Google for Startups network, and we're also partnered with AWS. So these are just some of the advantages that you get from joining our program. But feel free to drop us any questions if you have them. And if you have any questions from Mubariz, I think he's quite active on Twitter, so you can always reach out to him, right, Mubariz?
Yeah, or LinkedIn, feel free. I'm always happy to support. But yeah, I would encourage you guys to continue with this. If you have a fintech related dream, go for it.
Awesome, great. Thanks, Mubariz, and hope to see you soon.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys. Thanks a lot for having me, and good luck. Take care.
Bye-bye.